Welcome to training session number 4, lesson number 2, Accounts Payable. The Accounts Payable window is used to record the amount charged by a vendor or manufacturer for all of the items sold, services invoiced, and items that have gone into inventory. These amounts represent the cost on goods and services provided. Entering cost for all of these items is what gives Prism Connect the ability to calculate and report the cost of sales used to determine the gross margins. There are 5 major sections within the Accounts Payable window. The first section is Search Options. There are several search options provided to help identify the record to which costs will be applied. You can search by Patient Invoices, which is based on approved patient invoices, Orders, which is based on patient orders or stock orders, Vendor Doc Number. This will search for records based on the vendor document number entered when receiving orders. Serial number allows full or partial search on a serial number for hearing aids or ear molds. Patient name allows full or partial search on a patient first or last name. Vendor name allows full or partial search on a vendor name. Invoice dates for patient invoice searches. Receive dates for order received dates. Payable status limits the search to one of the drop-down selections. These selections are any, no limitations, all records returned in the research results. Outstanding, results are limited to records where payables have not been applied. Entered, results are limited to records where payables have been applied but have not been posted. Posted, results are limited to records where payables have been applied and the payables have been posted. Records are considered posted after they have been exported to QuickBooks accounting system. After specifying the desired search options, click the search button to initiate the search. The next section is Search Results. This displays the records matching the criteria specified within the search options. By default, the results are listed alphabetically by patient last name and first name. When searching by orders, stock orders are always listed at the bottom of the list. Selecting a line within the search results controls what is shown in the other sections of the window. The next section is Vendor Invoice Summary. This is where the vendor invoice information is entered. We have Invoice Type. This displays the type of vendor invoice entered. The values include New Invoice, Return for Credit, Non-Return Credit, and Additional Cost Entry. Received Doc Number. This displays the vendor document number that was entered when the order was received. Invoice Number. This is where you enter the vendor's invoice number. Original Invoice Number. This is enabled when entering a vendor credit memo, used to specify the original vendor invoice number, which when specified brings up a list of items shown in the original invoice detail section. When the vendor invoice is not a credit memo, the field will be disabled and the vendor invoice number will be redisplayed. Payable to. This drop-down provides the ability to select the correct party to pay, as it may be someone other than the vendor supplying the items. For example, hearing aids that were ordered from Unitron through a buying group. In this case, the buying group would be paid rather than Unitron. Invoice date. This is where you enter the vendor's invoice date. Shipping amount. This is where you enter the vendor's shipping charge. The vendor window within the administration model allows the default charge to be set up so that all payable invoices have the same amount by default. The amount can be overwritten as needed. Tax amount. This is where you enter the tax amount charged. Invoice total. This is the total amount due as reported on the vendor invoice. This amount will be used to confirm that the invoice detail has been fully accounted for. The Allocate button. This can be used to spread the shipping amount, tax amount, and invoice total to all of the items appearing within the detail. This is most helpful when all of the items in the detail are the same item and have the same cost. After using the Allocate feature, any amounts in the invoice detail can be overwritten if necessary. The next section is Invoice Detail, Cost Entry. This displays the items that were on the patient invoice, patient order, or stock order. This section is used to enter the cost, the shipping amount, and the sales tax for each item. After entering the cost for each item, the sum of all the items total must equal that of the total invoice amount, as entered in the section above. The final section is original invoice detail. This displays the items and costs that were applied when the original vendor invoice was entered. This section will only be populated when entering a vendor credit memo. It is provided as a means to ensure that the amount credited is equal to the original amount charged. Let's take a look at how to enter a new vendor invoice. To enter a vendor invoice as a payable, search for the record to which the payables will be applied. Use a payable status of any or outstanding to locate the invoice. Select the line item which to apply the payable. Click the New Edit button. Enter the vendor invoice number as it appears on the invoice. Note that if the invoice number matches that of any other invoice already on file, a message will appear as a warning to avoid duplicate entry of the same invoice. Select the vendor within the Payable To drop-down field. Enter the vendor invoice date as it appears on the invoice. Enter the total shipping amount charged. Enter the total sales tax amount charged. Enter the invoice total amount. You can click the Allocate button to allocate the shipping, tax, and invoice total. This works best when all of the items in the detail are the same item and have the same cost. Or you can enter the cost amount for each of the items, enter the shipping amount to be applied to each of the line items, enter the tax amount to be applied to each of the line items, and then click the OK button to save. Now let's look at how to edit a vendor invoice. When the payable information entered from a vendor invoice needs to be edited and the status of the vendor invoice is entered, search for the record to which the payables have been applied. Use a payable status of any or entered to locate the invoice. Select the line within the search results corresponding to the record to be edited. Click the New Edit button. Edit the information within the vendor invoice summary and/or the invoice detail section as needed. Click the OK button to save the information. Each item can have an expected cost amount defined for it. The expected cost amount for each item is managed and maintained within the Global Items or Items forms within the Administration module. When saving the vendor invoice information, a message may pop up if the cost amount on each item is different than an expected amount. The message serves as a warning that the amount charged may need to be questioned and possibly disputed with the vendor. You'll notice in the message that the item cost exceeds the standard cost by more than 5%. The percentage threshold can be configured within the System Settings window of the Administration module. Additionally, there's a checkbox within the System Settings that control whether the pop-up message includes a question asking if the cost of the item should be used as the new expected cost going forward. If the Yes button is clicked, the information retained in the Global Items or Items window will be updated with the new cost amount. This feature can be useful for those who do not want to go through the various items to enter or update the expected cost. While entering payables, you may find that a serial number does not match that which is reported on the vendor invoice. If it is determined that this was simply a result of a data entry error when the order was received, the serial number can be quickly edited. To edit the serial number of a hearing aid or ear mold, make sure that the invoice is already in edit mode. If not, click the New Edit button. Click in the cost field within the line corresponding to the items whose serial number needs to be edited. Right mouse click on the line corresponding to the items whose serial number needs to be edited and click the Edit Aid or Ear Mold within the pop-up menu. The Hearing Aids and Ear Mold window will open, within which the serial number can be edited. Click the OK button to save when finished editing the ear mold or aid. Click the Close Window button to close the hearing aid and ear mold window. The Accounts Payable window will remain open while editing the aid or ear mold. After the hearing aid or ear mold window is closed, the revised serial number will be displayed in the Invoice Detail section. Let's take a look at how to do a return for credit. To enter a vendor credit memo, search for the record to which the credit will be applied. Use a payable status of any or outstanding. The action column within the search results should say Return for Credit. Select the line within the search results corresponding to the record to which to apply the credit. Click the New Edit button. Enter the vendor invoice number as it appears on the invoice. Enter the original invoice number that was used to record the cost of the original sale. If the original invoice number is not found, a message will appear telling you the original invoice number must match the one previously entered into Prism Connect as a new invoice. If the original invoice is not found, the credit cannot be applied. When the original invoice number has been entered, the original invoice details section will be populated. Select the vendor within the Payable To drop-down field. Enter the vendor invoice date as it appears on the invoice. Enter the total shipping amount charged if needed. Enter the total sales tax amount charged if needed. Enter the total invoice amount. Enter credits as a negative number. For example, a credit of $500 would be entered as negative $500. One note here, the Allocate button is not enabled when entering credit memos. There are a couple of ways in which to populate the invoice detail section. The first is manual entry. Enter the cost amount. Remember to enter credits as a negative number. Enter shipping amount. Enter the tax amount. Second way is to use the original invoice detail section. Double-click a line within the original detail section to set the corresponding line in the invoice detail section with the amounts from the original. The amounts copied will be equal to the original, except it will be reversed with a leading minus sign, and it will not include the original shipping amount. Once complete, click the OK button to save. Now we'll take a look at how to split records when the vendor provides separate invoices. When a vendor splits hearing aids up so that each are listed on their own invoice, the invoice detail within Prism Connect will need to be split up as well. To split the invoice detail, begin entering the new vendor invoice like normal. Within the invoice detail section, enter the cost, shipping, and tax for the items pertaining to the invoice. Leave or enter the cost, shipping, and tax amounts as 0 within the fields that do not pertain to the vendor invoice. Click the OK button to save the invoice information. A pop-up message should appear. Click Yes to proceed without applying cost to the lines. Alternatively, invoice detail lines can be split by using the minus button appearing to the right of the invoice detail section. To utilize this approach, begin entering a new vendor invoice like normal. Within the invoice detail section, enter the cost, shipping, and tax for the items pertaining to the vendor invoice. Put the cursor on one of the lines that does not pertain to the vendor invoice. Click the minus button, available to the right of the invoice details section, to remove the line from the vendor invoice. Repeat these steps for each of the lines to be excluded. Click the OK button to save the information. In either case, the detail lines removed from the current invoice will be available again to have payables from another invoice applied to them. From time to time, there may be cases when a vendor overcharged for an item that was received and not sold to a patient. In those cases, a credit may have been requested from the vendor, which is referred to as a cost adjustment within Prism Connect. When the credit memo has been received, the credit should be applied to the original item sold. To enter a non-return credit, click the Cost Adjustment button at the bottom of the Accounts Payable window. Enter the vendor invoice number as it appears on the invoice. Enter the original invoice number that was used to record the cost of the original vendor invoice. If the original invoice number is not found, a message will appear. The original invoice must match one previously entered into Prism Connect as a new invoice. If the original invoice is not found, the credit cannot be applied. When the original invoice number has been entered, the original invoice details section will be populated. Select the vendor within the Payable To drop-down field. Enter the vendor invoice date as it appears on the invoice. Enter the total shipping amount charged if needed. Enter the total sales tax amount charged if needed. Enter the invoice total amount, and remember, enter credits as a negative number, so $500 would be entered as negative 500. By default, the invoice detail section will be blank and the detail lines will need to be added to it. To add detail lines, double-click on the lines within the original invoice detail section that correspond to the items for the credit. Repeat this step for all lines pertaining to the credit received. After lines have been added to the detail invoice section, do one of two things to enter the credit amount. Manually enter the cost, shipping, and tax amounts as needed. Remember to enter credits as a negative number. Or use the Allocate button to evenly allocate a total credit amount to each of the lines in the detail section. Click the OK button to save the information. There may be occasions when a patient invoice does not contain all the items for which the clinic is being charged by a vendor. For example, hearing aids were sold to a patient and later it is determined that ear molds would help them. The original patient invoice did not include the ear molds, and perhaps the patient will not be charged for the ear molds. The cost of the ear molds need to be applied to a patient invoice. It may not be desirable to apply the cost for the ear molds to the hearing aids because that would skew the reported cost for the hearing aids. In scenarios like this, the additional cost entry can be entered, where additional items can be associated with a patient invoice and the cost can be applied to those additional items. The original patient invoice would not be charged. However, within the sales reporting window, these additional items appear along with the original patient invoice and the cost of those items would be included in the gross margin calculations. To add costs for items that were not in the original sale, search for the patient invoice to which the additional items relate. Select the line corresponding to the patient invoice within the search results section. Click the Additional Cost Entry button, and note the Additional Cost Entry button will only be enabled when a patient invoice has been selected within the search results section. After clicking the button, the vendor invoice summary and invoice detail sections are cleared out. Enter the vendor invoice number as it appears on the invoice. Select the vendor within the Payable To drop-down field. Enter the vendor invoice date as it appears on the invoice. Enter the shipping total if needed. Enter the sales tax amount if needed. Enter the invoice total amount. Add lines to the invoice detail section. Click the plus button available to the right of the invoice detail section to add a line to the detail section. A pop-up window containing a list of items will appear. Select the item within the list and click the OK button to add to the invoice detail section, or double-click on the item within the list. Enter the serial number for each of the items if needed. Enter the cost, shipping, and tax amounts for each item, or click the Allocate button to evenly allocate total amounts to all items. Click the OK button to save the invoice information. That completes training session number 4, lesson number 2, Accounts Payable.